Welcome to Waypoints, the podcast of fly fishing travel. With helpful travel tips, news and events, destination profiles, great stories, and expert advice from seasoned and experienced traveling anglers, this is your backstage pass to the world of fishing travel. Waypoints is fueled by adventure and brought to you by Yellow Dog Fly Fishing, a hands-on specialty travel and booking company that delivers the industry's very best insider knowledge, logistical support, and trip preparation. Freshwater or saltwater, international or domestic, Yellow Dog has you covered. And now your host, Yellow Dog founder and director, Jim Klug.
Joining me today is Jim Bartschi, president and head rod designer for Scott Fly Rods. Just as Scott has become an iconic brand in the fly fishing industry, Jim Bartschi has become an iconic name. And with close to 30 years with Scott Rods, he's recognized as one of the most innovative, exceptional, and successful rod designers of all time. But along with building amazing fishing tools and leading one of the most recognized rod companies in our industry, Jim is also a true angler. While some can say that they work in the fly fishing world, others truly live and breathe it. Jimmy is the latter. From his constant pursuit of new species and new destinations, to his commitment to conservation, to his leadership within the fly fishing industry and business community, Jim, as an individual, has had a huge impact on the sport of fly fishing. Jimmy and I have known each other for more years than we probably care to remember, and I'm proud to call him a friend. So welcome to the show, Mr. Bartschi, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jim. That was quite the intro.
Well, Happy New Year. It's
Happy
good
New Year to you.
Finally have you on Waypoints and the chance to sit down and talk a little bit about what you do and your life and your decades of wisdom from a life of fly fishing.
Wow. You're right, though. Happy New Year. This is 2020, and I mean, were we 25 when we met each other?
It was more than a few years ago.
Yeah, I was going to say, so we got at least a couple decades, if not pushing 3.
Well, we started as young men, and now we're sitting here across the table from each other, and we've got a little more gray in our beards and in our hair, and we're not the young guns we used to be. But
that's actually kind of something we should both be proud of. We've had a lot of good friends come and go in this industry, and it's a small handful of people that have really had the passion to stick it out and be part of it for, their whole careers. So,
well, it's a good life to have, that's for sure. And you're surrounded by good people. It's always been one of my favorites. And you are certainly on that short list right there.
Thank you.
Well, how's the rod business, Jim? How are things at Scott these days?
Good. In fact, I think the rod business for most companies is really good right now. We've had a good number of years in our industry of expansion, of increasing participation. I think we're doing a better job as an industry welcoming new people and getting them into the sport.
I would say that's definitely the case. We're seeing so much more of those efforts really kind of come into fruition over the last couple of years. What's been going on at Montrose with Scott this past season? You guys got some exciting things happening?
Oh, yeah. We always do. We are as busy as we've ever been. A big part of that is building our new sector fly rods. And that's just put yet another big push into our overall capacity needs, and it's just keeping us all super busy and occupied.
Well, congrats on that. The sector's had a huge impact since it came out, which is great. Give us a little bit of background for our listeners, Jimmy, on Scott Rods and kind of a quick history of the company, because it's been around a while.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting little case study, I guess. It was founded in 1974 in San Francisco, which at the time was the kind of the epicenter and hub of the fly fishing industry in the U.S. I'd say sort of like Bozeman or Denver would be today. You had the Golden Gate casting ponds. You had these two little Russian boys growing up there casting, who now we all know as Tim and Steve Rajeff, the greatest tournament casters of all time. lots of innovation was going on, not just in terms of technique, but in terms of equipment. You had Winston rods based there. A lot of hard goods companies were based there. Sort of what we consider the modern fly shop was born in Northern California, I would say. So a lot of that stuff was going on.
And you also, it was also home to, Krieger and Puyons and so many of these icons of the sport.
Exactly, right. So there was a ton of energy and innovation happening there at that time. And Harry Wilson, the founder, was right there in the middle of all that, sucked into all that. And he really started out as at the time, fiberglass was the predominant material. And his niche and sort of his reason for innovating in the industry was he figured out how to make really fine performing, smooth casting, multi-piece, short light line fiberglass rods. And at the time, a typical fly rod was something like a 7.5 foot 6 weight, right? A lot of rods like that. But there weren't many 7 foot 3 weights. And there certainly were very few 4 or 5 piece 7 foot 3 weights that you could stick in your day pack and hike up into the mountains and go fish the high country with. So that was his little niche when he started. Pretty cool place to be. And then it was, it must have been about 3 years into the project, Fenwick, who was the biggest brand in fly rods at the time, came out with the first series of graphite rods, and that was a big deal.
Game changer.
And but what was interesting is that they came out with basically they used the carbon fiber prepreg in place of the fiberglass prepreg. So they made a bunch of 7.5 foot 6 weights, which is, it's great. It was a big jump over glass, but not the most compelling rod. I think Harry's light bulb moment, his kind of brilliant moment was, he said, wow, I think I can take this material and make a long light line rod. And, in his enthusiasm and excitement, went over to the Golden Gate casting ponds and told everyone he was going to build a 9 foot 4 line rod. And they were like, you've been in the sun way too long. Go home, sleep it off. But he was not to be deterred. And within about a year, he introduced the world's first 9 foot 4 line rod to the world. And it was, talk about a game changer, on Henry's Fork, on Hat Creek in California, on all the Paradise Valley Spring Creeks. Huge difference, right? All of a sudden, fishing, a size 20 spinner on a 12 foot leader that tapered down to 6X was not only possible, but it was making
effective.
It happen. Yeah.
That's right. Well, and a lot of people don't realize that that was where it all really kind of started with the 9 foot rods. Especially, all throughout the West, total game changer.
Yeah.
How about your history, Jimmy? You started with Scott as a pretty young man. How did you first find your way to the company? And what kind of led to the opportunities that you have now?
Yeah, so I was growing up in the Bay Area and really into the fly fishing scene. So like you had mentioned, creative sports, on Andre Puyons, he was a great mentor in terms of learning how to tie flies and things like that. Not only among me, but other people who were part of that small group I was talking about, who are still around. Michalak was running the fly shop Reading and running guide trips, which I was lucky enough to be able to guide for their operation, and then Pete Woolley's Fly Fishing Outfitters, another early great fly shop. And so I was aware of Scott, and I would go down there and bug Harry and Larry Kenny, his partner, wanting to cast rods, wanting to learn things, wanting to see what's going on, and essentially wasting their time. And eventually, I think the ultimatum was something like, either get a broom and do something useful or get the hell out of here.
So you picked up the broom.
So I picked up
and the rest is history.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and that's pretty much this. I mean, so for the last few decades, that's what I've been doing, pushing a broom around the place. I always like to refer to myself as the janitor at Scott.
That's right.
Because
you do it all. If something needs to be done,
clean up.
You clean up. You do it all. And when you're in charge, that's inevitably the way it always works.
That's fun too.
You wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and just a little one other thing about the company that's really interesting is so that's how it got its roots, but a lot of companies that are around today that started 30, 40, 50 years ago have since gone on to do a whole bunch of other things, acquire other brands, branch out into other product categories. And what I think is really unique about Scott and what I am still really excites me is that we do one thing and it's all we've ever done. And as far as I can tell, based on our strategy, I think it's all we're ever going to do. And that's we handcraft fly rods.
Well, and that brings up a great point. And I've been dying to ask you this question because, you've got this marquee brand in Scott. And you guys have always stuck with that, we only do rods philosophy. Whereas, as you just said, so many of your competitors are now making reels and lines, and they've got, soft goods and a clothing line and all sorts of random gear. I mean, have you felt the pressure to branch out and try to be more things to more people?
We certainly have gone through the exercise of, yes, we felt the pressure. And at a certain point, we almost went down that path. But through, vision, commitment, whatever you want to call it, dumb luck, we decided we were going to see if we could do what we do well enough to be able to just do that. And as we sort of embarked on that journey and went down that path, we started learning things about it. And it turned out that it made us better. And it turned out that we could just do that. And so we learned that along the way. And the more we learn it, the more it reinforces, us doing that. So it's cool.
So we're not going to see the Scott casual leisure wear line or swimsuit line coming out anytime soon?
No, not anytime soon.
I know our listeners have been dying to get the answer to that.
Yeah, we might do a one-piece footsie pajama at some point, but...
Well, I mean, why wouldn't you?
Right, exactly.
That's perfect. Well, aside from all that you do with Scott and the amazing work you do in rod design, Jimmy, you also, you travel and you fish and you love it and you're as passionate about it today as when we first met each other, decades ago. And every time we talk, you always seem to have a pretty strong lineup of destinations planned for the foreseeable future. You're out there, you're not only building rods, you're putting them to work and you're taking them out into the field. Japan, Kamchatka, the Bahamas, New Zealand, you're kind of all over the place. Do you, at this point in your life and your kind of career as an angler, do you have a preference for salt or freshwater? Is there one direction you're leaning or...
No, I honestly love it all. I'm just as happy, standing at the parking lot pool on the Gunnison, 20 minutes from the house, as I am off on some far-flung destination on a flat in some remote place of the world. I really still love it all. And I would say I try and do that as often as possible. So I'm just as likely to, after work, go spend 2 hours, looking for a riser on the local river as I am planning a next destination trip. So, I think for me at least, my love of fishing and the places it takes me and the people it connects me with, it has always been a big driver. And it's what's really kept me passionate about the industry. And I think, it's made the trade-off of having, not that fly fishing is a bad career by any means, but, certainly, if you were looking for world domination, the fly fishing industry probably isn't the one you'd pick. And so... part of staying engaged with the sport and the places and the people has always fueled my passion for wanting to stay in this industry, so.
Well, that's a common theme we hear a lot about on this program is, the places it takes you, the people that you meet. And it is something that I think is appreciated by people that, do make this their path in life. It is one of the things that keeps you going and motivated and excited about being a part of it for sure. Now, I know these days, aside from getting out close to your home and fishing the Gunnison on a given afternoon, you also keep a boat in the Keys. And are you in Islamorada, Key West?
Key West.
In Key West.
Yeah.
In your opinion, are the Keys still the most important or one of the most influential saltwater destinations in the game? Or do you think that the emergence of other worldwide destinations have changed this over the past couple decades?
For me, the Keys are still a mecca that deserve all the respect and all the the lore they've built up. Is it the best destination? Is it the one and only? No, absolutely. There's great fisheries in destinations outside of the U.S. that I think are among the finest in the world. But I still go back to the Keys. It's sort of like, the Fork as a dry fly mecca, or Yellowstone Park or something. There's hallowed places in our fly fishing history, the Catskills, that just draw us and they draw the community in, and having been part of that Keys community now for close to 30 years. It's hard for me not to go back, and I also think it is among one of the most challenging fisheries on earth. So I always appreciate that too.
Yeah, I'm a good analogy to the Henry's Fork in that way. Right there.
Right. You work for them, and everyone counts.
Everyone counts, and the Keys it's not only kind of sacred grounds and hallowed waters, and like you talked about the history and the lore, but it's also full of just super legit anglers combined with the most off-the-wall characters you'll find gathered in any single place.
Exactly.
I mean, you wonder where Carl Hyacin gets his material, and it's like he just hangs out there and reads the paper.
I was just going to say, he just reads the newspaper and hangs out there, right? Because, it is all for real. But honestly, when I'm down there, I'm either on the water or tucked away somewhere usually. So,
well, let me ask you this: when people travel to fish, typically with destination angling, you'll spend what can be a substantial amount of money on the trip package. You'll buy your flights, you plan for your tips and gratuities, some additional costs. And of course, buying gear is a big part of it. And I would say that for many destination anglers, it seems like the trip itself is only a part of the experience, and that buying new gear and new toys is definitely kind of integral to the overall adventure, wouldn't you say?
I think so, for sure. But I also think that it's not necessarily just the acquisition of new toys. I think most people, when they're going on a trip like that, whether it's Alaska, the Seychelles, wherever, you're making a pretty big commitment just in terms of not just financially, but in terms of your dreams, right? You're basically, you put a deposit down on your dreams, I think. And so you're so excited about what could be, right? There's no way you want to go show up there without dialed gear that's the very best you can get, right? Whether it's, your clothing systems, your optics, your rod, your reel, the lines. I can tell you this: I would never get on a plane and fly halfway across the world with old fly lines on my reels, ever.
Well, you see the great ads. It's like, look, you just traveled 4,000 miles and you're going to fall short in the last 100 feet.
Yeah, right. I think there's so much. We hang so much of our, like I said, our passion and our dreams on these trips. They're so exciting to go on. And so I think the reason we want to go out and get all the best new gear we can and dial it, and we spend so much time on that prep, is so that when we get there, we're ready.
Set up for success.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's still, who knows? Things may go terribly wrong, but at least we went in with a fighting chance.
That's right. You're well armed. Well, let me ask you this, and since again you know a thing or two about fly rods, I'll specifically ask you about this. I'm going off on a saltwater trip, let's say for the first time. Never been before. I'm new to the saltwater world. I walk into my local fly shop. I really have no idea what I'm looking for in terms of travel rods, what's going to be the best. What advice would you have for someone that's in the market for new travel rods or kind of taking that next step? What are things to think about or look for or questions to ask when you walk into that fly shop?
Absolutely. So the first thing, and I'm glad you said walk into that fly shop, because my very first piece of advice is actually connect with a fly shop, and preferably a fly shop that knows something about where you're going. And if they haven't been there themselves, they've been places really similar. But definitely connect with the fly shop, and don't be embarrassed if you don't know a lot. That's what they're there for. Ask them questions. Ask them to give you options and then try them. And if you can do that, or if you've worked with them and you trust them and you already know, take their recommendation. But if you're not sure, it's someone you haven't worked with before, try stuff out. Buy the very best stuff you can that fits you. And that's the single best piece of advice. If you feel comfortable with the gear and you know you got the best stuff that you could, that's a huge step right there. That's a big piece of it.
Well, it's not only going to help you perform better when you're actually on location and in the game and trying to make that important cast, but it also gives you that confidence.
It's so much of it. If you feel comfortable, you perform better, right? That's just in any sport or endeavor. The more comfortable you are and the more familiar you are, the better you perform. When you're unsure, you have questions, or you're just not prepared, it's going to make you perform less than you're capable.
Well, and you're going to question yourself. You're lacking in confidence, and you're going to stumble. It's inevitable.
Yep.
Well, continuing to talk specifically about rods, because again, this is what you do and what you know very well. We've had conversations in the past where there are some fly rod companies that build rods that are primarily designed to cast really well. If you're in a controlled environment, if you're at a casting pond at a consumer show, and you know how to, the mechanics of a fly rod, this is a rod that was really kind of designed to deliver a beautiful loop for anglers that know how to cast. All right, those are great casting tools. Other rods, however, are designed more to fish, and they're more kind of, all right, I'm out in the field, and a great casting rod isn't necessarily translating into a great fishing rod. It certainly can, but talk to me a little bit about those differences.
Yeah, well, they're actually slightly different disciplines. So pure casting, especially with a piece of yarn on the end of a leader or something, it's a great pursuit in its own right. There's a lot of people who have spent a lot of time perfecting the cast, and I think that's a wonderful part of our sport and part of what defines it. And the better you can learn to cast, I think the more you enjoy the sport. But fishing is a much different endeavor. There's all kinds of things going on that aren't happening in a controlled casting environment, whether it's the combination of your leader and fly and the weight and size of it or whatever, the types of lines you're using, environmental conditions, just the sometimes pressure or chaos from things happening quickly and unfolding. Let's say, those GTs screaming across the flat at you. A lot of things go into it that aren't there in that controlled environment, from adrenaline to other, like I said, your terminal tackle. So we have always taken the approach of, for us, a rod is really a practical tool to enhance your fishing experience and success. So our focus has always been on field performance and reliability. Of course, that means the rod has to cast well, but but we spend so much time actually vetting these products in the environments they're going to be used in, and trying to dial in those little things that happen out there, that if we can figure out on our side in terms of design and production, help make that angling experience better.
That's well said, for sure. And, other conversations we've had in the past, we've talked about how there are, kind of power rods out there that will take someone who's a bad caster and allow them to add 10 or 15 feet to what is still a fairly bad cast. And they think, oh my God, this is the greatest rod ever. Look at the distance it's getting me. But it's not necessarily enhancing their casting or their skill or their technique. And it may not be applicable to, as you were just talking about, the conditions that you are going to see in the field.
Yeah, because a lot of times, think how many times on a saltwater flat that seems so immense when you think about it abstractly, but get on a skiff or wait it and do that on a day when the sun's covered up with clouds and you can only see 15, 20 feet in front of you. A 90-foot cast not going to do anything for you. So there's definitely a lot of situations that are not about pure distance. Sometimes pure distance is what's needed, but I would say so many more are about being able to respond to the situations that come up, because you're not in control of all those. You can try your best, but a lot of it is reactionary or responsive, right? It's our job to see what's happening and then react to it. And so you really want your equipment to be able to adapt with you.
And the only thing that you can count on is that it's going to be unpredictable and constantly changing.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Yeah, that is the one for sure thing. So,
well, let me ask you some more specific questions about Scott as a company. You guys make your rods, you produce the blanks, you build and assemble everything here in the U.S. and in Colorado, in fact. Why are you guys still doing this in the States when so many companies have outsourced and they're now having their rods built and sourced and assembled in places like Asia? Well, to you, why does it matter that these are rods that are built in Montrose, Colorado?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we certainly have a lot of pride in American made, but really the true reason we do it is we want the control. We want to be the ones who touch everything. We want to be the ones who know exactly what went into this rod and how. And so that's why we put an individual serial number on each one so that we know the day we started it, what materials we had in stock. I mean, we know all that information. And so it's about really our confidence in, I mean, certainly there's a lot of good rods made everywhere now. So I think the argument that, the best rods or the only good rods are made in the USA is a fallacy. I think there's incredible rods that are made everywhere. The reason we do it and the reason we've continued to is that and we talked about this in the beginning when you were asking some questions. We've learned along the way how to be able to do this and do it really effectively and successfully, and also not have to, we've structured the business to support the rod making rather than, let's say, the branding. So we don't have to reduce our manufacturing costs so we can put more money into advertising, right? So we've structured the business so that we can spend more of our dollars making the rods and keeping it under our own roof, and that's really why.
Well, these are interesting times in our industry. I mean, it seems that these days there are dozens of new upstart kind of small-time rod builders, more than we've seen in a long time. And it's easier for these businesses and these entities to get noticed, with Instagram and social media. The barrier to entry for some of these companies has gotten a lot lower. Do you think that these small-time players hurt or help your business and really big brand fly rod builders in general?
I think that all companies contribute and help the industry. The good ones will survive and will continue to offer something that is significant and that generates demand, and the ones who aren't will go away. And so I've always been a proponent of the more the merrier. And I think it leads to innovation. It leads to inclusion, which helps just grow the sport and the participation in it. And I think it's good for all of us. And so I've never been afraid of new entrants into the rod space. I think if you, let's say you lose your position, well, you probably did something or didn't do something you should have. There's room for everybody. You remember, especially back from some of your early days of positions you held at other companies. I mean, it used to be really hard to start a rod company.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the few that did start up and brought in stuff from China were marginal at best in terms of quality and performance. That's all changed. It's very hard to buy a bad fly rod today.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, a good analogy is like a pair of skis.
Yeah.
If you can ski, there's so many brands out there, there's different price points, but if you know how to ski, they're going to work for you.
Exactly.
Some are going to feel better than others.
That's right.
It's like with a fly rod, but they're all going to perform. And that didn't used to be the case with fly rods.
And it's made skiing better for the consumer and for the sport at large.
Right.
Right. And so I think the same thing for fly fishing. It can never be a bad thing to have access to good equipment.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and that was a really good diplomatic answer, by the way, about more people the better. But and it actually runs into my next question, because not only do you run Scott Rods, but you're also the current board chair of the American Fly Fishing Trade Association, also known as AFFTA. And for our listeners that aren't familiar with AFFTA, AFFTA is the sole trade association for the fly fishing industry and effectively the voice of kind of really the business of fly fishing. You've been involved in the organization for years, Jimmy. I think you were chairman years ago, and they've brought you back in, and now you're running the board again with a lot of great people.
Since you're no longer chairman, someone had to be, right?
Well, where do you see the state of the industry right now? We're heading into a new decade. It's 2020. For fly fishing, for the business of fly fishing, do you think things are strong, and is our sport growing right now?
So I couldn't be more excited for our industry. We definitely have challenges that are significant. However, we've also never been a stronger industry in terms of, quality equipment, an understanding of global fishing destinations, a deep commitment to conservation. It's never been stronger. I'm seeing more get done in important areas of our sport, like conservation work, like responsible destination travel, like companies giving back, like new companies coming in, like welcoming new people. Fly fishing 15, 20 years ago had I think fairly legit reputation as a bit of a snobby, elitist sport, primarily for old guys like us, right? It's funny that now we're the old guys, right?
Yeah.
But it's never been a more welcoming place. Is there room to improve? Heck yeah. But, and do we have a lot of challenges and headwinds on the conservation front? Yes. But at least from my perspective, and I'd love to hear yours, I think we're in a stronger place than we've ever been, and I think we're poised for a next great leap.
Well, I agree with that. But let me ask you specifically about something we touched on a minute ago, about the state of the specialty fly shop and the retailer network in fly fishing? I mean, in a world where everything seems to be now sourced online or available through Amazon that can be delivered the next day, what's the next 10 years look like for the fly shops that are so integral to our sport?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, and I think it's a tremendous challenge for them. But my current observation is that while the fly shop network hasn't expanded, and may have even contracted a little bit from if you go back 15, 20 years.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's definitely contracted a bit. But the shops that are there are better than ever. They are performing their role as sort of keepers of the sport and ambassadors, exactly, to share the knowledge, to engage people, to teach them, to keep them involved. It's better than I've ever seen it. And I think they're getting smarter. They're responding to those challenges and difficulties by innovating and becoming better. So I'm super encouraged about where specialty retail stands. And I think in fly fishing, it's actually like a great sort of haven in that everyone's so used to impersonal, click of a button kind of transactional stuff that when you actually get to go and be part of a community and you get to connect with people, and especially about something that you love and that you're passionate about, most people who fly fish, they love it deep down. That's like what they can't wait to go do. And so to be able to connect with that, days when you're not on the river or something, when you're in the city, after work, popping into the fly shop, talking gear, learning something new, it's just a great thing. And I think there's always going to be a place for specialty retail in our industry. And a lot of it too is we'll see how brands go in the future. For instance, one of our things, just like we decided we were only going to make fly rods and we were going to make them all ourselves, we also decided at some point along defining what we do is that we were only going to sell them in specialty shops, because we're big believers in that place as an anchor for our sport. And there's other brands who are like us. And then there's other ones who have taken a totally different approach, and they're all about being all online. And, so I think just like we were talking about with brands and equipment, there's going to be a place for all of that, but the good specialty shops are going to survive and thrive.
Yeah, and we need it.
Yeah.
This is a sport that needs it, for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, let me change gears a little bit, all right? One thing we know in life, one certainty, okay? Rods break. All right. Mm-hmm. We also know that tippets snap, waders eventually leak, fly lines crack and fall apart in time. These are realities that as anglers, we all know, okay? We all expect this at certain points. But with regard to broken rods, all right, what are, in your opinion, the most common reasons that an angler breaks a rod? And what do you typically see when you get rods that come back?
So the data says that about 74 to 7, let's just say 75% of rods break in the tip. And out of those, about 80% break due to some rod tip and object interaction. so let's just say, car doors, yep, ceiling fans, yep, screen doors, tailgates, boat racks, trees, bushes, walking through things. So because typically the tip is not only the finest, most delicate part of the rod, but it's also 9-10 feet away from your hand. And a little bit of hand movement equals a lot of tip movement out at that distance. That's just the way it goes down a lot. So being aware of your rod, and especially the end that's furthest away from you, is one of the great first steps in preventing rod breakage, because most of it comes down to that. Actually, very few rods actually just fail on a fish, or casting. And if they do, that's a good chance they were either damaged prior or they might have had a defect. But again, we're talking a teeny percentage versus accidental breakage, and especially accidental breakage of the tip.
Well, I know I've never, broken a rod in a ceiling fan in my room rigging gear after a late night session at the bar. That's never happened to me.
No, exactly. I've never stepped on one.
No,
I've never fallen on one.
Do you, at this point, all these years of building rods, when they come back, can you just kind of take it out, look at it, and be like, oh, I know what happened there?
Yeah. Pretty much. And it's interesting, too, though, because like I say, I think the vast majority of rods are with some interaction that isn't part of what I would call the mechanics of fishing, casting and then pulling on a fish. The vast majority are impact damage from either a heavy fly or hitting a gunnel or a car door or, something like that. And whether they break at that instant or slightly, a short time afterward. But that's what we see. And I think, being aware of that and then also protecting your rods, especially transporting them protected, is a huge part of preventing that.
That's right. Well, let me ask you about the lifetime warranty for fly rods. Now, give me your honest opinion on how this has changed the game for anglers, for retailers, and of course for fly rod manufacturers. I mean, now, every rod out there pretty much has the guarantee, but it didn't used to be that way. And has that been good for the industry? Has it been good for manufacturers? What are your opinions on that?
I think it's actually silly. I don't expect anything I own that if I break, somebody should just fix it for free or give me a new one. So it's a bit of a, like you said, it developed as a part of our culture. But does it make sense to me? No. Do I think it's good for the consumer? Absolutely. Because like you said, fly rods break. And if you've purchased a, expensive fly rod and it breaks, the ability to get it repaired or replaced, depending on the company's policy, gives some peace of mind for sure. And I think you asked three things. You said, how do I feel about it? How do consumers feel about it? And how do retailers feel about it? I think retailers hate it, and rightly so, because I think they see it as well, if you can get your rod fixed all the time, why would you go get a new one? I think consumers like it because it gives them peace of mind and sort of an insurance policy. And then, like I said, I think it's hard for me to say that it makes sense because, like I say, I don't expect that of anything else in my life. But as a company, because it's the reality of how the industry is, we've had to learn how to adapt and deal with it. Because if we didn't, it would probably be catastrophic. So learning how to integrate that into our business model has been very important. And it can also be a competitive advantage or disadvantage, depending on how you play it. So.
Well, let me ask you this, Jimmy. So aside from what you guys have developed and are working on at Scott, what gear introductions or new equipment have you seen come out recently, say in the past couple of years, that have been a game changer for the traveling angler? Beyond just fly rods, for our sport, what are some gear introductions or innovations that have made travel and destination angling easier or better for the angler?
I hate to be so non-committal, but I actually have to say across the board, I think equipment is better than it's ever been. Whether you're talking about technical clothing, base layers, outer layers, think about wading boots versus what they were 15, 20 years ago. It was like you were like club-footed back then, right? I mean, they were awful. They were uncomfortable. They didn't stick very well. You couldn't feel anything that was going on. They were heavy. And now they're, like a climbing shoe or something. They're amazing, right? They fit well. They hold you down to the bottom well. So, I mean, I think anywhere you look, reels now are so good. I mean, there's so many nice reels on the market. Have we had a huge quantum innovation in the last 5 or 10 years? No, none that I've seen. But the incremental improvements have been absolutely awesome. Whether it's travel luggage, whether, like I say, it's technical clothing for fishing, whether it's rods, reels, stuff has gotten really good.
Oh, fly lines.
Yeah.
I mean, look at what we've seen from 10 years ago.
Yeah, right.
For destination and species specific tapers and materials.
Absolutely.
It's incredible.
Right. Yeah. And so I just think that, have we seen the next new material for a fly line the way, PVC changed fly lines? Have we seen the next new material for a rod the way graphite did? No, we haven't had those multi-generational sort of quantum jumps, but people's understanding of the materials we do have to work with have gotten to such a refined level that stuff is more dialed than ever.
Yeah.
And it's fun to use.
And what a world of difference it's made for the destination angler.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think about my comfort level fishing all day in the cold and rain now. I mean, there used to be a fairly high level of misery, and there was sort of almost a point of honor of I toughed that one out. Sort
was
of
it fun? Hell no, it wasn't fun.
Yeah, exactly, right. And honestly now, I mean, I can stay completely temperature comfortable, not too hot, not too cold, stay dry. I can be completely comfortable in really gnarly conditions. Same thing out in extreme heat, So, and back to what you were saying, it's I can also take a fly line that's going to be supple in the cold or stay, workable in extreme heat and not just coil up on me and become a mess. So all these little things have come together to just make that experience so much better, and also not just better, but more reliable. When you're, halfway across the world on, 6 flights away out in the middle of nowhere, it's nice to have your gear work, right? I mean, and
you're not running next door to the fly shop to replace it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it's important. And, and I really think, like I say, I actually cannot think of a category that has not really improved, especially in the last, if I look back over a decade or so, just at the general level of your whole kit it's gotten so good.
Well, and we'll see what the next decade brings, right?
Yeah.
All right. So with each of these sit downs, I'd like to do a little bit of kind of a lightning round. I'm going to throw some questions at you. We're going to let our listeners get inside the mind of Jimmy Bartschi right here. Okay.
That's frightening.
Get to know a little bit more about you. It is frightening. Buckle in.
Okay.
All right. So quick questions here. Favorite species to target on a fly?
All.
Okay. If you can take only, and I'm not going to let you get away with a non-committal answer on this one. You can only take along one rod for a trout trip in the U.S. West. What length and weight and model are you bringing?
Radian 9'5" weight.
Average amount of time it takes to move a rod project from the concept and design phase to actual production?
Depends on how well conceived it is and whether or not we have access to all the materials we want. But typically, I like about 2 years.
If you're not out fishing, you're doing what?
Working in fly fishing and hanging out with the fam.
How about another pastime aside from fishing?
Oh, I've squandered so much time fishing. I haven't really developed a lot of other ones. I'm kind of juvenile in that way, but I took up guitar a few years back, and so I'm kind of a hack learning to play guitar. I love reading, and I love cooking and eating. That's a big one. Since home time's important, one of the things that I always do at home is build family time around meals. And so that's a time when everyone's done with work or school or not busy, and we can connect around cooking and eating meals together. So definitely honed those chops. So that would be a big one for me.
All right. Now, this is a question I get all the time that I absolutely hate when people ask me. So, of course, I'm going to ask you.
Thanks.
Destination at the top of your bucket list.
Ooh. I'd like to explore the jungle more. So I would like to get back and do some of that higher trib clearwater Dorado fishing, which I have not done. So that would be one. Gosh, once I've been almost everywhere. So
that's why it gets hard to answer.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think of a few things I haven't done that I really want to do. Oh, I can tell you one thing. I want to go fish the Dean. I've never fished the Dean. I can't believe it. That's like saying, never been to Yellowstone or something, but I haven't. And it's a horrible oversight in my fishing life. So that will be something I'll do for sure. Yeah, those are two that come to mind right away.
All right.
It must be really hard for you to answer that one.
Well, here's one for you. Hardest line weight for a rod manufacturer to consistently produce. What's you say, okay, 2 through 12.
It's always the two far ends. Always. So, whether your lowest line weight is a 1 or an 0 or a 2, and your heaviest is a 12 or a 13 or whatever, those far extreme ends are the most difficult.
There's a lot we could say about that statement right there, just in general, the far ends being the most difficult.
Exactly.
But we'll leave that alone.
Yeah.
That's a totally different podcast.
Exactly.
All right. Biggest, actually, let me ask you this. The specific Scott rod, the exact model that you're most proud of after all these years.
Wow. I've got to say, well, two of my personal favorite rods right now, and I if I could think of a better rod, I guess I'd make it, would be the Radian 9'5" weight and the Sector 9'7" weight. And those are probably the two rods line weights I use the most. So those would definitely be my two right now.
Okay, another tough question for you. You got to get one answer on this. The biggest conservation threat that our industry is facing right now, our sport is facing right now. It's a tough question.
Well, it is. And I'm trying to think I know the answer. I'm trying to think of how to state it succinctly, but it's ourselves, bottom line. And our willingness to stand up for these places. So if we left them all alone, they'd just be fine. But because we also have to coexist with them and also balance them with other needs, it's our will to prioritize their well-being. That is our most significant issue, is can get enough people to share that point of view? And if we can, we will succeed. And I think every specific issue that's come up, like if you take an actual threatened area that was conserved, it's always the same. It's that enough people had the will to save it and protect it. And I think that's going to be the same case, whether we're talking about, flats environments, rivers, lakes, any of the watersheds that we depend on to get enjoyment and practice what we love doing, but also that, on a bigger scale, the planet depends on. So I think that is our number one conservation issue.
Good answer on that one. All right. How about this one? Tenkara, fly fishing's disco moment and darkest hour, or a legit method for chasing fish with a fly? What's your opinion?
Well, so to me, Tenkara definitely has a place. It's a different discipline to me than fly fishing, because to me, the single and only defining thing about fly fishing is the fact that you cast a fly line to deliver a fly. So using a tenkara rod is a different discipline, but I think fine. I'm all for all kinds of fishing. So I've never really seen it as a conflict to fly fishing, or even, and if they want to be kind of a little subset in our industry, I have no problem with that. But I don't see it, again, I don't think it's a question of fly fishing to me. It's just different fishing.
There we go. Well, as we wrap things up, one of the big questions that we get all the time at Yellow Dog relates to traveling and flying commercially with rods and reels. And we're seeing more and more airlines and even countries these days banning rods for carry-ons. And I always find this hilarious, Jimmy, because, I was flying down on the plane today. There's people carrying heavy metal canes and a guy with a guitar and somebody with tennis rackets. And I mean, you name it, right? Everybody's bringing this stuff in. But more and more, we're seeing countries and airlines saying, you have 4, saltwater fly rods and that you can't bring those on board. Do you have any advice for the traveling angler when it comes to checking and protecting your valuable rods? And do you have a favorite kind of travel and packing system when you're not going to be allowed to carry it on?
Yes. So I have become a huge fan of the large duffels that will accommodate a hard case that holds multiple rods. So it's a bit of I think of it like the turducken, where I take a clothing bag and pack that really efficiently. I take a gear bag with reels and fly boxes and stuff and pack that really efficiently. And then I take a rod tube and I stick it all in this huge duffel, right? And so the duffel really isn't my primary piece of luggage. It's my shell to hold all the stuff I want and keep it all together. And that's been successful. I have not either lost it or had anything damaged using that technique. And so that's become a go-to for me.
Yeah, and we're seeing that system more and more. And I would just add, I always put a really good TSA travel lock on that duffel.
Absolutely, yeah.
Got to have that.
Yeah.
And then I put a spare one in the side pocket because TSA inevitably will not relock it and they'll lose it, right? So when you're coming home, you'll have a second one.
That's a good one. I'm going to incorporate that. I have not been carrying a spare, but that's a good one. I should.
Well, and the turducken is awesome. I think Sims is probably going to steal that, and you're going to see the new Sims turducken duffel come out. So.
I hope they do. Please do. No, it is true, though, that system has, I think, become more successful. I would be really uncomfortable checking a hard rod carrier on its own with a luggage tag on a trip.
It says fly fish the world and screams to everyone, hey, there's $800 rods and a bunch of reels in here, and it's
exactly
the size of a trombone case.
Yeah,
so.
and sort of the large duffel thing. It's it could be filled with anything, so it's nondescript.
Great system.
Yep,
for
great
sure.
system. So,
well, last question I have for you, Jimmy. Your advice and suggestions, and it can be in 1 or 2 sentences, or just any thoughts you have on how someone can be a better traveling angler overall these days.
Well, a few things. Prepare. Whether it's your gear list, whether it's your research of your destination, or whether it's practicing the techniques you'll use most there, definitely prepare. And then my other number one piece of advice is go with an open mind. You never know what you're going to get. You might have awful weather. You might have great weather, whatever. You don't know. The other thing is if it's a new destination and you don't know it really well, keeping an open mind lets you experience so many more things, meeting people, cuisine, culture, whatever it is. So the 2 things I always try and do is be as well prepared as I possibly can and be as open-minded and flexible as I can because, like I say, you never know. And in both ways, it can help you get through tough times, but can also open your eyes to wonderful new stuff.
Awesome. Well, good words of wisdom right there. Well, thanks for sitting down with us today, Jimmy. This has been great.
Yeah, it's
always
awesome
fun to have these conversations.
Chat with you, yeah.
Right on. Well, that's it for this episode of Waypoints, the podcast that is 100% dedicated to travel, adventure, and exploration. Be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com to plan and research your next fishing trip, sign up for newsletters and new podcasts, and stay up to date on the latest travel news and developments. Join us for our next episode of Waypoints, and remember, life is short, and no one ever regretted a life of adventure.
This has been another episode of Waypoints, the podcast of fly fishing travel and adventure angling. Thank you for joining us, and be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com for more trip updates, travel news, expert advice, and adventure profiles.